Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for AI Native Telcos, building the foundation for autonomous network. I am Shrikant Salaka. I lead the product at TrustLogix, and I'm honored today to host alongside two exceptional leaders, Sridhar Rao, Global Telecom CTO with Snowflake. He brings a deep expertise in the data platform architecture for telcos, and Sanjay Zop, Global VP AI and Data Engineering and Strategy with Ericsson, who has been helping telecom providers build autonomous and AI-driven networks. Sridhar, maybe a quick intro from you.
Thanks, Srikanth. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Sridhar Rao. I've been in the telco space for a while. Started my career with Lucent Technologies, worked with Netcracker and CSG, Matrix Intelligence, and did some consulting on the way. I have been fortunate enough to work both on the infrastructure side of the network operators, building IMS, VoLTE, HSS, online charging, PCRF, infrastructure capabilities within the core network. And at the same time, also supporting BSS and OSS implementations, supporting order management, billing, and fraud management capabilities across telcos around the world. At Snowflake, I'm bringing the power of Snowflake's AI data cloud to support the needs of telco operators everywhere.
Sanjay, maybe. Uh,
Yes, sure. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Sanjay Zop, a Global VP of Data Strategy and Engineering at Ericsson. I spent our last 2 decades building and leading large-scale data teams and platforms at companies like Apple, Oracle, and Netgear. Today, I focus on building data foundations and enabling AI at scale while ensuring trust, compliance, and real business impact. And I'll share some practical lessons from that journey today.
Thank you. Thanks for the introductions. So let's start with Sanjay. So going into the problem space and the market forces that are driving this. So Sanjay, as a AI and data leader, how are the access from regarding the access control standpoint, what is creating most friction in practice today for leaders like you?
So when we look at data access today, most of the friction comes from these 4 areas. First, I would say fragmented controls. Data is access, or data is access is enforced differently across platforms. So teams can't get a consistent answer to who has access to what or why. Second, I would say AI adoption. AI agents don't behave like humans. They act autonomously and can accumulate permissions over time. So traditional access models weren't designed for that. So organizations struggle to actually control and audit how AI uses data. Third, I would say contractual limitations. Many contracts were written for human access and reporting, not for model training or automated inferences. So without translating contract language into machine enforceable policies, teams will either over restrict or create risky exceptions. And finally, I would say data residency. Data and compute are now distributed, but residency rules still apply. And if we can't enforce location based policies where data and compute actually run, access will be slow and error prone. So, together, these issues create risk and slows down decision making, implementation, everything.
How is this friction showing up operationally? Any example that you can share without a lot of business details, but at a high level?
Operationally, this friction shows up in very practical ways. Uh, for example, access takes weeks instead of days because approvals are manual and different systems apply access differently. And then if you look at AI teams slow down because they can't tell which data can be used for example, training models, or which data can be used for inferences. And if you look into the compliance part of it, audits become painful. Teams can't easily prove compliance. Teams can't prove who has access to what data, which data was accessed, under which conditions. So the net effect is really slower time to insights, higher operational cost, and growing risk of compliance.
So Sridhar, from a data platform provider perspective, where do you see this traditional access models start to break as customers like Sanjay are implementing and moving towards AI and autonomous operations? What is your take as a platform provider on this?
Yeah, so from a platform perspective, right, everything that Sanjay was talking about, this is what we are seeing in a lot of implementations where the fragmented data also leads to fragmented control and access policies around that. Right, and that then translates into inability for an AI to work with that data because of all the different policies and different access controls that are restrictive in nature by design, right? Um, and one of the things that we are seeing is where when we bring the data together and give operators and customers within their and enterprise domain visibility to that data with a single pane of glass, that in itself changes the way they actually start to think about that data and then how they can actually use AI within their landscape. And so the fundamental architecture that we bring to the table or our data platforms bring to the table is that we provide that single pane of glass from a data perspective, but then also provide visibility into how that data is being consumed across all the different business users.
And some of the key bottlenecks that you as a CSP encounter to democratize the data in the operations, any thoughts on that? What are the bottlenecks that cloud service providers are encountering to help this?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So the biggest, hurdle that people have is not understanding who has access to what at what time and then why, right? And that entire chain of thought that who is accessing the data for what purpose and how they are accessing it and then why they are accessing it, that observability is a key point. And when you add autonomous agents to that equation, it gets even more complicated because these agents, as Sanjay said, will be taking actions on behalf of users. They behave differently, right? Their time zone of decision is very compressed. What an individual may take a few minutes to make a decision on, an agent might make that decision in milliseconds. Now, when you do that kind of a compressed decision capabilities, you need to know exactly what those agents are. And when you grant these agents just a simple role-based access, that tends to break things down primarily because now the agents has to acquire higher and higher capabilities, and sooner or later you have agents that become super agents that can do just about anything in your network when you're talking about an autonomous operations. And that can be an operational pain point. It's not going to solve the problem, it's going to actually complicate it because now agents are doing things at a faster pace with very little supervision. So you
So
want to actually create an environment that blocks that makes that more safe and more usable.
So to summarize what your point is, the security models were built for like a human level, and now the machine level speed needs a different paradigm to think about how do we enforce these access controls. So Sanjay, as a telecom leader and as Ericsson operates across multiple operational systems, analytical and AI platforms, just like Sridhar was mentioning, the fragmented part with vastly different access patterns, where do you see the biggest breakdowns happening today when you're enforcing these access controls?
I think Sridhar covered a lot of it over here. And the way what we notice or what we are experiencing is that the biggest breakdown actually would happen due to lack of unified visibility. Teams can't really answer a simple question: who has access to what data, which data was accessed under what justification. And on top of it, if you look at identities and permissions are modeled differently across different platforms. So an access decision implemented in one system isn't enforceable into a different system or even visible in a different system. That mismatch is what breaks down when we start introducing AI agents. And this was already a problem to begin with, but AI agents have are is amplifying that because of autonomous nature of it and how they interact and they go from system to system and they can acquire permissions and lack of this unified visibility or lack of this unified orchestration layer is what actually breaks down.
That brings up to my next question, a very good point that you mentioned, right? Like various systems, various access models, and a lot of enterprises have implemented robust role-based access controls. They scale fine, and some of them, the scenarios for simple use cases, they work very well. And I have been involved in this, building them in my past career as well. But with a global company like a telecom company with global presence and complex contractual obligations, and as you mentioned, with the AI further complicating it, what are you, Sridhar, this question is for you. What are you seeing on the field to enable or to see how these RBAC problems are manifesting?
Yeah, so that again comes down to what you're trying to do within the network, right? So there are two aspects when it comes to telcos that we need to keep in mind. One is telco as an enterprise. There is a lot of RBAC and controls within an enterprise, within their own operation, internal operations, and then there's also an operational control with respect to managing the network, the decisions that they are making within the networks as part of the autonomous network operations. They tend to have separate systems by design, right? There's one for enterprise and one for network operations. And what we feel is what we are seeing is that there is a tension between how the enterprise users are enabled to take operational decisions within their network, and then how the roles are assigned for people to actually work with those capabilities. And because these agents are now how would I call it, autonomous in nature, a simple RBAC will break down, and we are seeing that happen in multiple cases where an agent is able to do certain things, but in order for that autonomy to actually work and that automation to work, the agent has to acquire additional permissions, and you have to continuously keep granting them additional permissions. And one of the things that happens with agents is they are not permanent. These agents will come into existence, and over time they will change their behavior, and the RBAC controls aren't designed for that changing behavior within the operational context. And so this is where a system that can help these agents acquire the right policies and work within the policy and the guardrails that we have in an autonomous environment is super important.
So, based on that, Sanjay, how are you seeing in the Ericsson data office? How are you adapting to the newer models and complementing your role-based access controls with purpose-based access controls and various other policy-based access controls?
See, when it comes to AI agents, I'll add to what Sridhar just said, right? One of the drawbacks of RBAC is RBAC starts to fail when you end up with like in today's world we have RBAC, right? So it will fail or it starts to fail when you end up with too many roles and too many exceptions. Because if we try to use the same model and try to apply it to your AI agents, you will end up having too many roles with too many exceptions. So what in real life what happens is that teams will grant or like wider access, and then this access get reused by automation. And in reality, if we can't really natively express things like time bound or location based access, RBAC quickly becomes a liability. So it simply won't scale, and especially when it comes to autonomous agent. So you have to look at it a little bit differently now. We have to move from, or we have to start thinking about RBAC to PBAC and ABAC. So that's the start, and then look into a orchestration layer, single orchestration layer, which interact with various systems. So there is uniform access policy framework which can be implemented across the various systems. And then if you bring AI agents into play, then we also need to make sure that AI agents, if they're operating through MCP or if they're using MCP, then you have these access policies implemented in MCP itself, as well as your data layer. So that's where, RBAC will not scale in this world because of, autonomous nature of agents. But then the solution is to start looking at it a little bit differently, go from that place to PBAC and ABAC, and then again integrate that with MCPs or whatever you're using agent to agent communication. Uh, Integrate that with your data access, and then you can actually start leveraging AI in a secure manner where access is controlled and managed even for AI agents.
And that leads to the next point, right? Now you have defined the policies and your first point where we started, the visibility part of it, right? Like now you defined a policy-based access control and the agents are accessing data from multiple data platforms. You need that central visibility also that the agents are accessing based on those policies and the PBAC and ABAC policies in a compliant manner, right? So, any thoughts on how you are looking at that observability and visibility as well after the policies have been enforced for the agents?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the same thing again, right? You really need to find a way. You really need to find a way to implement this central orchestration layer. And on top of it, that should be more machine readable, machine enforceable. And you need to have an ability to monitor each agent and AI action. So to understand what that AI agent is doing, what data it is accessing, what data it is modifying, and also make sure that you have a way of ensuring compliance. You can trace it, and if need be, we should be able to prove compliance. And for that to happen, you really need to have this centralized mechanism of access policy framework, and of course it has to be implemented at a data layer as well as I would say agentic AI layer, and then use that to, and then you need observability layer too to see what AI agents are doing so you can manage or govern compliance so that you can prove it. it so that's the way to go and implement these AI agents in a secure manner so that we understand what they are doing. Because what is also happening is that with AI agents, yes, that's all coming into play, but even your new regulations, for example, your contractual constraints are getting tighter and tighter. And now organizations have to go and prove the compliance. And these questions are being asked at senior level, starting from board. Okay, how are we securing our data? How are you making sure that we are meeting our contractual obligations? So you need a mechanism to actually not only enforce it, but also govern it and prove it.
That's a very great point, right? Like the provability part across these platforms. And Sridhar, that leads to the question from your perspective, right? Like permissions for humans versus agents is different. And now, as a cloud platform provider and a large scale adoption of Snowflake intelligence and Cortex features, how are you handling the human versus machine scale access controls, and what are you suggesting as a platform provider to handle both these human versus AI and provide the visibility as well?
So two aspects to that, right? One is giving visibility to that, and then applying, platform level controls against that data and the usage of that data across different human and machine infrastructure. So we have implemented the Trust Center that allows us to provide the entire visibility into how the data is being accessed, and then complete granular transactional level details with respect to who are access the data, why, when, and then what was done with that data, right? And so that visibility is provided. We are also building additional tools where we are doing anomaly detections in terms of patterns of access to the data over time, and then identifying patterns and making sure that they are not anomalous in nature, and immediately providing alerts around those pattern recognitions as well, right? The other thing that we are seeing, when it comes to autonomous operations, and that's kind of what we are talking here, is policy controls. When we apply these policies, it's important to make sure that these policies are well defined and declarative in nature. Right. One of the things that happens with operations, especially with agents interacting with each other, is that these agents might be taking actions that are in conflict with each other, and then having a policy that allows these conflicts to be resolved is important, right? So for example, I give you one of the agents wants to make a change to an antenna for some reason in the operations, because that's what it was designed to do as part of its optimization. Um, but that might actually interfere with some other activities that another agent is doing, right? And now the policies can evaluate it to basically say, okay, yeah, you're allowed to make a change under these conditions, and not any other conditions. These kinds of policies can that allows us to also manage the agent to agent interactions and then avoid conflicts that might be detrimental to the network operations.
So, how do you see this, Sanjay, on a telco specific? You mentioned like the strict contractual and geographical rules. How is AI compounding this, and how are you ensuring that the agents are not accessing the sensitive network or customer data? And the agent that was built, or let's say, are you building agents specific to US, agents specific to EU, or are you building agents which are generic and then enforcing the policies? What is your vision as a data and AI access control leader in this complexity that Sridhar has pointed out?
I see. I don't think we need to, the way I look at it is that I don't think we need to think about agents that way. What I'm trying to say is that we can't really, oh, okay, I'm going to build agent for this use case, for that use case, and then I'm going to embed access in it. I would separate it out. And by that, what I mean is that you need to have a central orchestration layer for access, and agent should use that layer. So it's much more scalable approach in the long term, right? And coming back to your question, AI really changes how data gets used in ways traditional contexts never really anticipated. Simple access to data now can lead to things like model training or inferences, and that breaks contractual terms. And for which that what that means is that for telcos, that means we have to treat our delivered data and model outputs as compliance assets now, and make sure that every AI agent or action is traceable and checked against residency rules, usage policies. So I would separate it out. I won't, I will just make sure that my AI agents, or my agents are actually using the policy orchestration layer, and that they work together in that sense, rather than embed policies into my AI agents itself.
That's a great design pattern, right? And in that, how are you operationalizing and how are you layering all these? You mentioned contractual terms, residency requirements. So how are you layering these policies and making sure this compliance, right? Like, which is a uniquely challenging thing for telcos, which are dealing with, Sridhar mentioned, OSS data, the VSS data. So how are you planning to operationalize some of these aspects?
Nowadays, you can't rely on manuals anymore. You need to take your contracts, you need to translate your contract language into simple policy rules. That's the step you have to do. And what that means is that who can access the data, for what purpose, where can the data live, how long the data can be kept, and enforce those rules really where the data and compute run. And when checks are automated and exceptions are traceable, compliance will become an enabler rather than a blocker. So with that principle, we are looking at building a repository. We have built a repository where we have our contractual terms translated into policies. And now we have access to that repository. Every system has access to that repository, which actually feeds building our data access framework. And when you build our data access framework, it spits out policies. And now these policies are at a central orchestration layer. So every agent or data system can integrate with or interact with that layer and know, okay, do I have access to this data? I belong to this region, I belong to this geography. Do I have access to this data? Can I use this data? For what purpose? For what duration? How long this data can be kept? So building that orchestration layer is actually in a machine readable format is what really makes it scalable in the long term. Because we really can't depend on manuals anymore.
Got it. So, Sridhar, on that note, right? So, what, as a cloud service provider, what are you enabling and what are the key areas Snowflake is investing to support the needs of Sanjay? And how are partners like us, TrustLogix, helping you, or where are the areas that have collaboration works for the telecom providers?
Yeah, so we are actually taking a platform approach to address the kind of issues that Sanjay was surfacing, right? And so there are two or three different areas where I would say that Snowflake is playing a key role. First is extracting information from contractual documents that can then be translated and made available for building out those plans. So that's almost like the document AI type of capabilities where we are actually taking textual information, translating that so that they can be embedded into a policy engine upstream. The second is we are making data accessible across different platforms. So we have made investments, and we have also done acquisitions where we are actually expanding our Horizon platform capability to build out a stronger metadata catalog functionality that spans both Snowflake as well as non-Snowflake entities outside of Snowflake platform. Because in a telco, you will have multiple data sources and systems that we will have to integrate, right? And then the third is we acquired Observe recently, and as part of that, we are actually creating a contextual observability capability right into the Snowflake platform that becomes part of our ecosystem going forward. So when you combine all of these three capabilities, we are kind of addressing a lot of the functional needs that operators will need in order to support that autonomous operational models that they're working towards.
That's a great point. Segue to my next point here. That's where partners like TrustLogix, what we are doing is we are leveraging those contractual obligations that you have created, and we are converting that into a policy-based access controls that can be enforced back into multiple of these data platforms. So, Sanjay, any comments on how you are seeing with the whole natural language processing and the document AI that Sridhar just mentioned and the policy-based access controls? How are you leveraging those? And what are you enforcing when you are enforcing these policies? Any comments on that?
Yes, so starting with document AI, or I would say let's say chatbot, right? I think that plays a big role for us because this repository which I talked about, right? We have chatbot on top of it, so we any person can actually get an answer to what kind of data I'm looking at, what kind of restrictions apply to that data, so they can get access to that. That's one. Second is that we are also enabled direct integration to this repository. And I say that because if you look at the various platforms large companies or telcos or any other company have, right? You have your analytical platform, you have your operational platform. Some of them are homegrown, some of them are standard. Like for example, you'll have Salesforce CRM, you'll have SAP, Oracle, you name it, right? So you and those platforms have their own enforcement mechanisms when it comes to access. But what they lack is that they don't understand on their own what are the contractual terms, what are the limitations, what are the policies should be. So what we are doing is that we have this repository on which we have a chatbot, but then we also have, we can access the data in the repository through multiple mechanisms. We can query data, you have API integrations. So we allow all the systems to get data from that. The third part of the equation is that we also, and this chatbot in terms of it is an important part of it because, for example, let's say someone goes into CRM and they want to give access to some data. Step number one is that they need to know, okay, should this person have access to this data? In what context? Where they get that information from? And if you're dealing with customer data, you need to look at contractual terms. So what we can do here is that this person can actually, if they are doing it manually, for example, they can use that our chatbot to talk to our legal repository to understand, okay, what are the terms and conditions of this data? Now I can use that information to provide access to the CRM layer. So that's one part of the equation. But the second part of the equation, and this is where the orchestration layer comes in. So we are building that orchestration layer in TrustLogix. So we use that information and we have our own data access policy engine which creates policies for us and those into TrustLogix for us. And from there, the implementations happen in various systems, and those systems are integrated with TrustLogix so that we have a unified layer when it comes to access definition of access policies. So we are using the host of technologies. We use Snowflake for the chatbots and the document AI and that part of it, and then we use TrustLogix here to as an orchestration engine. And then again, we have different platforms. They integrate with each other, and that's how we have implemented it.
Thank you, Sanjay, for that. So, Sridhar, as again, where do you see partners like TrustLogix enabling this within Snowflake when a lot of these telcos are building or a lot of some of these complex AI agents? Where do this partnership in the data access control layer comes into picture? And as a field CTO of Telecom, any insights onto that?
Yeah, so I see the extension of capabilities on Snowflake. Right? So from Snowflake, we have created a strong governance architecture around the data. Now, with the help of TrustLogix and some of the capabilities that you have in Trust AI, we are extending that security boundary to agents as well in a manner that these trusted relationships for these AI agents to execute within a telco operations, they have the ability to do that in real time. So we are able to extend our capabilities with the help of Trust AI into that. And this is important because when it comes to autonomous operations, I think a lot of the operators have different layers of complexity between the resources layer, the services layer, and then the businesses layer, and a common knowledge repository that actually allows them to work across all these operational boundaries is important. But then when you have that knowledge plane, you also need the appropriate access and the policies that allow each of these layers to interact with each other. And that's where Snowflake and TrustLogix comes into play, where we can actually create that environment for agents to operate autonomously in a secure environment.
Thank you, Sridhar. So, one final question. Let's make this actionable. As we are starting 2026 and budgets are being set. So, the question, Sanjay, as a data and AI leader in a large global enterprise, if you are trying to fix one thing to prepare for the scale of the AI operations, what is your biggest impact investment and where do you see highest leverage move going to be?
If we can do just one thing in 2026, I would say invest in a policy layer that extracts, orchestrates, and enforces rules. So it becomes your connective tissue for everything. It can, this connective tissue turns your regulations and legal requirements into machine enforceable policies across analytics, networks, as well as cloud systems. You take that and then you pair that with unified identity system and good telemetry system. So you can not only enforce, but you can also prove compliance. That one investment, I would say, will make AI adoption safer while significantly reducing friction.
That's a great point. That's very similar to what we are hearing from a lot of data leaders and AI leaders to invest in AI agent frameworks. Before that, have the identity system and the policy system and the orchestration system you mentioned to be brought together. Sridhar, any comments on that before I summarize the discussion?
Yeah, I would say that there is a lot of how would I call it, data disparity, and operators need to consolidate their visibility of their data, and having a platform approach, taking a platform approach to the data and avoiding data movement between systems so that they can gain that visibility is a key thing that operators need to pay attention to. And from Snowflake perspective, I think that will be the starting point. How do we help operators avoid large scale movement of data while bringing visibility and observability across that data landscape?
Thank you. Thanks, Sridhar. We heard from Sridhar about the key areas that Snowflake is investing to support telecoms for a scalable cloud-native data platform and enabling AI automation directly on the data without compromising performance. And from Sanjay's perspective, the challenge is not just having those capabilities, but how do you operationalize them, translating those business level rules, contractual obligations, geographic residency rules, and usage restrictions and monitoring and visibility across as the data is in multiple platforms and still being compliant, right? This is where TrustLogix with our policy control plane fits into the stack. A Trust AI built directly onto Snowflake's native capabilities and turns them into an enforceable business-aware access control and allowing companies like Ericsson to express policies in a language they care about, the business policies, contracts, regions, and purpose, and still combining it with the role-based access controls and consistently enforce them across all these platforms. And enabling AI, security becomes enabler of AI rather than blocking access. So having said that, we'll open up to questions from the audience. Any questions on the chat?
Yeah, Srikanth, we've got 3 questions so far. I think if they're all relevant, so if you want to go ahead and answer those, that would be great.
Okay. Sorry, one sec. So the first question is telcos historically have massive amounts of data covering various elements of telco ecosystem, which can impact the telco's ability to meet mandated service level agreements with customers. What do you see telcos focusing agentic AI on with the highest priority in the grand scheme of all various aspects of their business?
Let me take
Sanjay,
that.
yeah, okay, Sridhar, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot in that one question, right? And I don't know if we actually have one single answer that will address that question. So fundamentally, we are dealing with operators having a diverse data set. And essentially, what is happening is that data visibility is lacking. And so a lot of operators right now are working on various projects where they're trying to consolidate and bring visibility to that data. So there's ongoing work around the globe within the telco operators doing that. From an agentic AI perspective, there are domain-specific agentic implementations that are happening where the guardrails have been very carefully calibrated, and there are agentic implementations that are currently happening in production with those guardrails in place, right? So there's already work there that people are seeing decent results on with that heavy guardrails. But again, those are very domain specific, very controlled, environments where those agents are allowed to operate.
Sanjay, any comments on that from you?
I mean, I agree. That's what, yeah, no, yes, no, that is really the gist of the problem right now. This lack of visibility, and there's a lot happening in that one. And I would say, I would add on to it, you have to look at it, what you're trying to address and use case. But it's an ocean there, right? So you have to be more strategic in terms of, uh, what matters to you most. But I would also say that, if you're thinking from an access standpoint, then again, building silos for access is not the way I would go.
Okay. Okay. So the next question is on the agentic AI. I think, Sanjay, we want to hear from you in this. So the question is, we hear agentic AI production deployment in enterprises is bottlenecked for various reasons. Is it also true for telcos? That is question number one. Without going into a lot of, if so, what are the reasons? I hear a combination of ROI, model hallucination, model security. Without giving all the reasons, what are your three or four reasons where AI projects are backlogged before going into production?
Yeah. This bottlenecks, I would say, it's not one industry specific problem. It is all across the place. And it is not because of, I don't think it's because of lack of technology. Technologies are there to make it happen. The issue is, how do you operationalize it? And and that is for many reasons. Like, for example, you don't have the right data foundations in place to operationalize real deep AI. You can build a chatbot, that's a different story. But if you really want to build a multi-agented systems, right, you need some kind of a foundation, right, which is lacking for most of the organizations. And when we talk about hallucinations, yes, that is true. But again, the way to solve hallucination, there are two ways it can be solved. One of them is that your AI models or LLM models get better at it, which they are with time. But that's years away till they actually reach a point where they can do on their own. So you have to take care of hallucination by having a better data catalogs, by having semantic layers, by depending on your use case and business use case, you want ontologies, taxonomies. If you do that, then start cutting down the hallucination. And I must say that if you for example, if you use semantic layers, it cuts down your hallucination by it brings your hallucinations down to 2 to 3%. And I think the standard number is around 70 plus, something like that. So you would go from 70 plus to 97, right? So there are ways to do it, but those are all um, something which an organization has to do at an operational level, right? And if you look into a security standpoint, yes, there are bottlenecks because right now we don't have, most organizations don't have AI governance, or at least not at a place where they want it to be. Regulations are changing constantly. There is a hyper focus on contract terms and everything, right? And on top of it, how do you implement it across multi-agent systems? So all these things actually add up to a ROI part of the question. So it increases your ROI. So, but the way I see it is that it's a phase where you have to build these foundational blocks and you have to enable these foundational blocks, so then you can actually reap benefits out of it. So what I would say is that think about it strategically. It's just not about tools. It's all about your tools, your organization, and your incentives. And then take a step back and see how do I build this in a way which is much more scalable, and I can actually make it happen on ground and can show real ROI.
Great point, Sanjay. So the next question, Sridhar. So this is for you. You mentioned that telcos have diverse data sources, both in Snowflake and outside of Snowflake. How do you reconcile the diverse access governance between these data sources? Does this require some sort of ETL, ELT pipeline? And if so, won't enforcement of policies get lost? And how do you make sure there is no overprivileged access across agents? So yeah, you can take that, and I'll definitely add my color on top of it as a data access provider.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are seeing a lot of traction, especially in the telcos, is open data formats where we are able to actually work with data across different engines, including Snowflake, and being able to manage that open data format. So Snowflake has invested a lot in technologies like Iceberg that allows us to work with data that is in Snowflake and then that data that is outside of Snowflake. In addition to that, we have actually enhanced our metadata management capabilities so we can actually, work with data that is sitting outside, as long as we have visibility with that metadata management. So we've acquired Star Select recently that allows us to have access to data that is sitting outside of Snowflake and build out that metadata infrastructure for us. At the same time, what we are also seeing is when we work with open data formats, you know, we can work with that data and then also write to that data without ingesting that data. So that allows us to work with, avoid costly ETLs and ELTs because we are not bringing all the data. Everything doesn't have to come into Snowflake for us to work. Now, on top of that, and this is where the policy function comes in, right? And this is where the collaboration that we have with TrustLogix and being able to create that policy layer on top of that data and access controls is important, is because then we can enforce those policies in a transactional sense, in a near real-time environment, so that we are not bottlenecked with the static information within our access controls.
Yeah, just to add on top of what Sridhar mentioned, that layer of policies on top of it, making sure these policies get enforced into each of these data platforms, right? Taking that unified approach, right? Like a policy control plane will enable the customers when the data is moving across all these platforms, having that single pane of glass to manage the policies is what we have been seeing as well. So this question for Sanjay and Sridhar, both of you, the last one, it's an interesting question. I'm a 30-year veteran working at with some of the largest telecom companies. The sprawl of data started before the cloud era. It has been a mess for a long, long time. Putting an AI layer on top of this data mess could really improve the operational efficiency of these complex companies. But in my mind, this seems like almost untenable problem. In your experience with working with telecom companies, are they actually attempting to put this layer on top of the data sprawl? So Sridhar, maybe first you and then Sanjay. I know you sort of addressed this earlier on the data sprawl. Maybe your final take on that.
Yeah, so that remains one of the core challenges within the telecom industry. That data sprawl and that several years of data that is sitting across multiple systems. So yes, operators are trying to get visibility into that data landscape that they have, and there are multiple initiatives that are underway in terms of how that data becomes visible and usable within an AI landscape. Um, and to that extent, there have been some successes in the industry where operators are starting to do that. But again, those successes are in very small pockets. And the reason for that is exactly what the question suggests, right? It is a complex problem, and you can't just put AI on a sprawling data landscape that telcos have and expect the AI to suddenly become more efficient. So there, and this is, basically what we keep telling our customers and to the industry in particular, right? There is no AI strategy without a data strategy. So you need to first solve that underlying data problem. But then once you solve that underlying data problem, how do you access that data and you make use of that data in an efficient way is the second part to that. And that's what we are covering in this webinar. But once you do that, then your AI layer sitting on top of that would make sense. But you can't start with an AI and then expect your data landscape to support that.
Sanjay, your take on it. I know you mentioned about unified platform for policies for data sprawl. Any final thoughts on the data sprawl and how your AI strategy is addressing that?
I mean, that's really a problem for sure. But I think that part of the question was also like, do we think that AI can help us solve it? And I do believe it does. It does. But but it just speeds it up. Let's put it that way. We can use AI really to understand our data better. We can operationalize it on a system by system basis. But then on its own, it's not enough. You need to have a mechanism to make sure that, okay, it depends what kind of AI you want to use. If you want to use autonomous AI agents taking actions, then you also need to make sure you have the right access policies assigned to those agents. And then we have talked about the control plane, right? So that's one part of the equation. So you can, if you take a certain part of the platform and say, I want to look into this data, can I make use of my AI agents to operationalize it, maybe find new insights, maybe do some data quality or improve quality on that data? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. But that alone is not enough. And I don't think that is a problem which can be solved in a short period of time because the data has been collected over multiple decades now, and it's all over the place. But AI does gives us an ability to move in that direction for sure.
All right. Any other questions? Those are the questions that came from the chat.
Yeah,
If
I do want to do. I want to highlight something, right? There was a conversation on hallucinations and things like that, right? And what we are seeing is when it comes to intent-based operations, especially in autonomous operations, and we are starting to do that with Snowflake as a platform, is you need to first have the ability to translate an intent into something tangible, right? And you need to have a infrastructure that can allow that intent to be repeatable and translate appropriately every single time, right? You can't have different answers for your intent every time you ask a question, and that's part of that repeatability that is needed within your data landscape. And the only way you can do that is by having an appropriate data, appropriate guardrails around that, and then also making sure that you have the appropriate policies in which that intent is getting translated, and then setting the context. So this Sanjay talked about ontology and semantic layers. These are all the capabilities from a platform standpoint that allows you to translate that intent repeatably, yeah, and reliably, in the same way, right? And then once that intent is translated, then you need to take actions which can be, implemented through policies and other capabilities within the platform. So being able to do that consistently is important. And that is something not an easy thing to do, but you do have platform capabilities that you can use to support that.
Sanjay, any last thoughts?
I would say I second that. No, yeah, see, again, I think when it comes to access and AI agents, at the end of the day, we need to build a ecosystem where agents actually can rely on a access policy layer, and you need to bring it all together. Independently, it's really really difficult to scale your agents or even scale a lot of cross connections between data without knowing what are the terms and what are the conditions and can I do this or am I allowed to do that. It creates a lot of risk unless we actually solve that problem from that standpoint.
Got it. Thank you. And we are running out of time. So we have heard how modern data platforms enable AI with proper governance from Sridhar and the operational realities faced by telecom companies like Ericsson from Sanjay, and how Snowflake, Ericsson, and TrustLogix together have been building an access foundation that makes autonomous networks possible. For those who want to go deeper, we are also offering technical demos. We can deep dive into the specific architecture and access challenges. We can follow up in email. Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you all for joining. The future of telecom is autonomous. Let's ensure and govern it and make it ready for AI. Thank you.
Thanks, Srikant. Thanks, Sanjay.
Thanks.